you. So first of all, I can, unfortunately, Poppy can't be part of the presentation this evening for us, but we wanted to both express our deep thanks for the invitation to be involved. We have been watching the other speaker sessions and they've been fabulous. Also, we have a long, I've never visited Indonesia personally, but Poppy's uncle was the High Consul for Australia in Indonesia for a period. So she has very fond memories of your fabulous country and people. I wanted to take you through a kind of body of our work with the thinking about the thematic that was given to us, and through that, I think I tend to prefer reading as I go, but hopefully this will all come through okay for you guys. So it seems fitting to begin, given we're themed as we are, with the circumstances of our practice and living. So Poppy and I established our practice together, as Andrew noted, in 2011. And we've since focused our efforts in our field in a very concentrated part of the world. We are Tasmanians, essentially set adrift in the Great Southern Ocean in the path of the Roaring Forties. In many respects, our cultural tendencies seem to run with the winds and cause our sensibility to float across the Tasman Sea to New Zealand, with which we share a cool, temperate climate. For our sense, we share more resemblance with our Kiwi neighbours than the greater Australian continental landmass to our north. Living on an island, or more accurately, probably as part of an archipelago, that lends a certain awareness to us as islanders. It condenses our sense of story and our sense as a people within a particular landscape. The awareness of this feeling is so pronounced, it actually has a name, nosology, and that is the study of islands as qualities in their own right. And so we're aware too that as an island, we are defined, as islanders, we are defined by the coastal margins and what lies beyond them. This is true in a professional sense also, where we have sought to understand the coalescing qualities of our practice and the place in which we practice as a unique meeting of two kinds of cultures and interests, which manifest as qualities in the body of our work. So in thinking about how to respond to these questions of locality and landscape in our contemporary Tasmanian context, we often refer to this image. It's a cartographic map of the Tasmanian coast, or then an unnamed landmass, drawn by the French expedition of Nicolas Baudin in 1803. And it's a record of the coastline as they saw it, but shows human inhabitation through pyres of smoke as inseparable from the profile of the coast itself. Tasmania, or Lutruwita, as it's traditionally known, is a place that has witnessed one of the most horrific and nearly complete acts of cultural genocide, perhaps in the history of humanity. The Palawa people, or First Peoples of Tasmania, maintain a unique and profound culture on this island and did so for 10,000 years and more. The world's most southern people, the Palawa, suffered unspeakable devastation through colonisation by the British Empire during the 19th century. Erroneously, history declared them an extinct people, but their culture still beats here, and their descendants are justly reclaiming their cultural practices and lands. Tasmania has had many names. Colonised as a penal outpost and originally named Van Diemen's Land, the island was used to execute the atrocities of the convict system, which evidenced a kind of depravity and horror that can still be felt in the fabric of our island to this day. So this brooding, almost Gothic history of Tasmania is backgrounded by a kind of exceptional and ancient landscape, which is Gondwanan in age, and both beautiful and dangerous. It's also the focus of an embarrassing and continuing environmental devastation. So our island in many respects harbours a deep sense of loss and melancholy, which we experience as a unique quality that we call the uncanny. This quality manifests in the work of artists and writers, perhaps most notably in the works of the writer Richard Flanagan. So in many respects, our work as an architectural practice represent a broad remembering of this island's history. And I wanted to take you through 5 key projects which we feel explicate the core tenets of our practice and thinking in this regard. To do so, I want to contextualise our approach within the broader framework of the canon. In our work, we are interested in the making of the interior. A building is a harbouring thing, Louis Kahn would say. Architecture comes from the making of a room. We feel this tradition of room making is often overlooked in Australian architectural discourse in favour of a more ocular-centric relationship with landscape, often in an effort to promote a sense of prospect with the view of the landscape. The sense of the room is diminished. Consider the questions posed by these 2 seminal dining spaces, Mises Farnsworth House, 1951 on the left, and Cahn's Fisher House, 1967 on the right. In the Farnsworth House, the overriding desire for prospect almost dissolves the sense of the room. That is the point. But in doing so, the occasion of the table is diminished. The dining space offered by the Fisher House is far more spatially nuanced and intimate. The quality of encounter, or the act of dining, is not compromised for the sake of prospect of the adjacent landscape. Rather, it is precisely located by it. And here in this 17th century Flemish painter Pieter de Hoek's depictions of Dutch Golden Age domesticity, we see this quality explicitly. An interior has form and presence, and an interior can be a place. And through the Romantic tradition, we find an approach from the interior toward the landscape. This is Caspar David Friedrich and Woman at a Window. In many respects, the history of the Tasmanian condition is contained in the promise of the sheltering interior. In the long traditions of Tasmanian space making, the nature of the interior is inseparable from the sense of being in the landscape. Shown here is the Pelion hut. These earliest pioneering structures speak about exposure and isolation, but also a particular kind of materiality, light and utility, and are intensely internal experiences in the exposure and vastness of the Tasmanian Central Highlands. Before us, other Tasmanian practitioners have worked with the same preoccupations. Here, Ray Heffernan's house at Little Swamport on Tasmania's eastern coast mirrors the silhouette of the Freycinet Peninsula and Schutten Island, the same coast that the French illustrated as they travelled cartographed the coastline. A rhythm of pavilions broken by landscape rooms, of contracting and expanding interiors. And Michael Viney's seminal house in Enterprise Drive in Hobart, on the slopes of Mount Wellington. A carefully sequenced and choreographed set of spaces which clarify a direct encounter with the slopes of the mountain by taking the sensing body deep into the interior of the house. Michael Viney wrote, "Space itself is amorphous, but is seen, felt, and realised as a factor in moving and doing." So in our work, the plan sets the foundation, figuratively and literally. If anything is described by the architectural plan, it is in the nature of human relationships. And we see that as a core focus in what we seek to clarify in our work. So we seek to correlate these relationships in plan and elevation toward the promise of a sheltering interior. So in considering these qualities, the first little project is a house on an enormous open landscape site. And it acts as a kind of study as a material strategy and how that can be taken in into how that can clarify qualities in a landscape and control the pressure of landscape. This small house is situated on a dramatic sloping site overlooking the southern Tasmanian township of Franklin and the Huon River. The site takes in an enormous panorama and prospect across the south of the island. The approach to the design is centred around its small scale and the pressure of the surrounding landscape. The initial spatial move is to resolve the terrain and make a place upon which the experience of the house can be situated and stabilised. Rooms are then huddled about a centripetal plan, which reduces circulation while maximising outlook and access to sunlight. The approach of huddled rooms is then articulated by a wall element, which simultaneously creates a backbone for the interior, but also consolidates the service areas of the house. This strategy offers a sense of an expansive interior to the tightness of the plan and serves to draw the landscape into the room. Access from below establishes a monumental approach, belying the intimacy of the interior and its scale. The glazing is slipped along the eastern facade to preserve privacy, while at the same time orienting the interior toward the valley below. In terms of materiality, the thresholds of the house are treated as shadowy intervals between the exterior and interior. While this shadow protects and elongates the threshold, this move also seeks to heighten the light on the landscape as it is reintroduced from the inside. The darkened interior palette heightens the shifts in cloud and sunlight, and this also sets up a play of scale within the room, of intimate domesticity set against the immensity of the terrain. In this way, the landscape itself becomes part of the material logic of the house. This is an ancient method of creating interiors that expand, of borrowing the materiality and light of gardens. The strategy seen here deployed in the 14th century and marvellous Shisendo Shrine in Kyoto. The clustered nature of the plan means that the material of the landscape actually unfolds at the margins of the house. And deep thresholds serve to increase the sense of depth of the plan as a counter to the pressure of the surrounding terrain. From the exterior, the terrace shares a diagonal connection through the house and underscores the axis with the mountain to the east. We've continued this idea of intimacy in the immensity of the Tasmanian landscape more recently for a series of small prototype cabins, which are situated at the bend of a rivulet on Tasmania's east coast. These small structures accommodate couples and continue the tradition of coastal weekenders, or what are locally termed as shacks. The exterior form is direct and unpretentious. By borrowing the geometry of the coastal margin, the interior structure specific relationships to the wider site. These relationships in plan realign and calibrate the connections to the landscape, but also test the ways in which orientation, spatial variety, and elevation can affect qualities of light, materiality, and the sense of the interior. Continuing the timber building tradition associated with the shack culture of Tasmania's coastal communities, these small cabins are conceived almost as pieces of fine cabinetry in a larger landscape room. The strategy of exterior and interior sets up an unexpected dialogue of contracting and expanding spatial experiences. And the compact massing belies a complex interior structure, which resists the temptation to engage with the optic of the prospect, seeking instead to heighten the sense of interiority and materiality. Connections to the wider site are made to highlight certain landscape qualities, which serve to background the use of the rooms. And the sense of interiority is most strongly experienced in the deepest and most private parts of the plan. Where detailing sets a relief for the seasonal inhabitation of the interiors. This is another project located more centrally in the island, and it's a speculation, really, a development in an isolated valley in the southern Tasmanian Midlands. And it's for a community of French Benedictine monks who have begun to establish a small priory in the area. Upon the gentle shoulder of a prominent hillscape which forms part of the priory landholding, a small lady chapel is proposed in dedication to the Annunciation. The Annunciation is the moment in Catholic faith when the Archangel Gabriel is said to have visited the Virgin Mary and announces to her that she will bear the Son of God. The moment has a powerful artistic lineage of humility, sacrifice, and Christian revelation. It is the epical revelation of the Gospel of John when the Word was made flesh. This little chapel is entered through a long, low-lit cloister into a gilded space for intimate monastic worship. The plan is anchored in its orientation to the rising sun of the feast day of the Annunciation, and it is naturally illuminated by one opening low in the wall of the chamber. And the interior is conceived as a kind of acoustic lens. The columnar volume produces a reverberation time of 4.5 seconds, amplifying the Gregorian chants of the monks, as if to multiply their voices in the chorus of heaven. The forms and materiality of the chapel are figural and corporeal. The monks approach from the northwest toward an edifice which is simultaneously ancient and new. Essentially an oratory within the scale of the landscape, the form could be seen as a ruin, a silo, or a reservoir. We find that being inexplicit about formal type makes for an openness in the interpretation of the architecture, so that the primary focus is towards wonder and intrigue, qualities that have a long lineage within the Tasmanian sense of the uncanny. The entry through the low-lit cloister denies the world, and on Lord's on the feast day of the Annunciation, an apparition illuminates the chapel interior, and the moment of the Annunciation is embodied. This next little project is a cottage located near the proposed site of the chapel in a township called Oatlands. It was established in 1821, and Oatlands presents as one of the most intact Georgian streetscapes in Australia. But like many Tasmanian heritage townscapes, it also harbours an unsettling mystery. This characteristic, which I've already spoken about as the Tasmanian uncanny, speaks to the unresolved histories of exile of both the colonial and Aboriginal peoples of this island. And its enigmatic quality broods to this day in the work of Tasmania's contemporary artists and writers. It's in this context that we approach the restoration of an archetypal 4-pile Vandemonian Georgian cottage. Built in 1842, the cottage was salvaged from impending ruin by our clients in late 2017. Georgian mannerisms were brought to the colonies by pattern books. The characteristics of the Vandemonian Georgian are peculiar, subtle and delicate, but also suffused with qualities of economy, purposefulness, and austerity. This small cottage has witnessed a long and fascinating social history. The generations of families who occupied this house for nearly 2 centuries were blacksmiths, carpenters, and pastoralists. Although in a state of impending ruin, the fabric of the cottage retains much of its original character. On land granted by Sir John Franklin to Jane Payne in 1842, the cottage was serviced by several outbuildings, accommodating stores, bathing, and additional sleeping areas, configured about the original Georgian sandstone core of the house. An initial program of restorative works sought to re-enliven the cottage's Georgian fabric and incorporate contemporary amenity. Decades prior, the northeasterly elevation had collapsed and been patched with asbestos panelling, and a series of lean-tos at the rear were no longer salvageable. The interiors were decaying from lack of light and rising damp. In plan, the cottage was composed of an archetypal 4-pile layout with a kitchen annex, which was removed to return the cottage to a more rarefied state of 4 sandstone elevations. As part of the new works, the footings were underpinned and the collapsing eastern facade was repaired. The asbestos was replaced with 2 large format windows, which form seats in the depth of the wall, just here. A small bathroom was secreted into the rearmost room adjacent the kitchen, and a boot porch at the rear and a retained chimney breast demarcate a courtyard. The internal cruciform walls of the house were originally lined in salvaged timbers and convict pit-sawn hardwood boards, presenting a kind of a primitive Georgian materiality. Referring to the original pattern books, we conceived of a strategy of timber panelling to clarify the mannerisms of the new work. This approach directly references the tendencies of Georgian room making as a layer of wainscoting inserted to intensify the qualities of the primitive Georgian interiors. Externally, a new steel awning represents the only contemporary intervention to the front facade. And to the east, the new paired windows bring in light and garden aspect. The entry hall shows original remnant wall fabrics and convict carpentry. And the vellum deed from Sir John Franklin to Jane Payne is hung in the entry. The memory of prior generations of blacksmiths and carpenters is recast into the new works through a series of finely crafted mild steel and timber insertions. These insertions provide a delicate scaffold to the rooms. Georgian mouldings have been detailed in unconventional relief to emphasise a quality of social cohesion with the original fabric of the house, such that the original room on the left now serves as the library, and on the other side of the chimney breast, a sitting room. And within the bedroom, timber casement shutters offer a sense of operating the materiality and history of the room. Remnants of earlier wall coverings were used as a palette for the refinishing of the Baltic pine ceilings in each room. And mild steel cabinetry and open hardwood shelving service the kitchen. To the rear, the new boot porch provides all-weather access. And externally, the remnant chimney breast clarifies a courtyard where the site salvaged brick serves as an infill to what we termed a kind of archaeological field of sandstone foundations, stoops, and hearths. We were extremely fortunate to work with a devoted builder on this project who understood the custodial foundation that was being laid by our exceptional clients. As an acknowledgement of the house's social history, our clients decided to name it in honour of Stuart Boson Pennicott, who was its last generational occupant. For our part, we've sought to re-enliven its fabric through a series of interventions and repairs which intensify its story. This final project that I wanted to talk about is about an ancient culture and its 2 centuries of their dispossession and exile and the return of a sacred landscape to its original Aboriginal custodians. So the Aboriginal people of Tasmania, as I've referred to them previously, the Palawa, suffered one of the world's most notorious attempts of cultural genocide. So in detail, for nearly a century, a determined war was waged against them, and by the end of the 19th century, the surviving community was forcibly removed from a landscape to which they belonged for over 40,000 years. The project site is located on traditional cultural lands in the northeast of Tasmania, in the Mount William National Park, known traditionally as Wukalina. The northeast of Tasmania is deeply significant to the Tasmanian Aboriginal people. It is the homeland of the Coastal Plains clans and the country of the tribal chief and warrior, Manalagena. During late 1831, after a decade of violent war, Manalagena accepted a treaty and safe haven offered by the friendly conciliator, George Augustus Robinson. However, as Manalagena was taken past the coastline of Wukalina, he knew that his community had in fact been deceived and dispossessed. He cut his hair and died 3 weeks later in exile. His daughters had married into the violent sealing communities of the northeast, and their descendants are the living Tasmanian Aboriginal community. George Augustus Robinson's promises to Manalagena were made on this land, and his descendants have fought for decades for its return. Wukalina, Mount William, part of Manalagena's country, is a sacred site, and at its foot, this small project is situated. This history offers an insight into the depth of feeling of our work with the Tasmanian Aboriginal community in this context. In early 2012, a year after we had started our practice together, we were presented with a compelling brief for a cultural walk by the chair of the Aboriginal Land Council. At the beginning of the project, Clyde Mansell, the chair, took us to a sacred site made by his ancestors over millennia. Here he told us the creation story of his people. It's the oldest story that Poppy and I have ever heard, and hearing it changed our perception of this landscape. The telling of the creation is a speaking into being of country. It is an initiation into the cultural and spiritual interior of the landscape. Clyde spoke about the importance of self-determination for his people in the telling of their story, and that moment clarified for us a clear purpose in the architecture of the project. The brief required that 10 guests and 2 Aboriginal guides were accommodated for 2 nights at a standing camp near Cobbler's Rocks. The cultural walk commences at Wukalina and proceeds south to the side of the standing camp, which is just here, Krikani Lumi, and then on to Larapuna, which is the location of the Eddiston Point Lighthouse Precinct. In our research, along with broad community consultation, we also turned to first-hand accounts of the traditional seasonal shelters of the Palawa. These were ostensibly very sophisticated structures which were carefully sited and extremely well made. Half-dome shelters were of the moment and followed a simple construction sequence. They expressed the methodology of their making and were layered to greater or lesser degrees of enclosure. Typically, the exterior was sheathed in a weathering skin of broad sheets of paper bark, while the interiors were lined with softer barks. Upon these interior vaults, the country was redrawn, interweaving storytelling and shelter. This notion of a storytelling interior and the open structure of the half-dome form heightens a sense of an expanding interiority, such that the country itself is experienced as a larger interior. This is a key idea in the project. The site was chosen by the Aboriginal trainee rangers on the basis of traditional patterns for Aboriginal encampments. It is approached from the dune, across the coastal heath, and slightly south of a freshwater creek. The siting is sheltered into the vegetation, giving an easterly aspect, just through here, and is bounded by a dense wall of Banksia and Melaleuca. This siting affords a clear arrival sequence through gateways of peppermint gum and granite outcrops. In considering this cultural background, a spatial question remained in the project of how to preserve the encounter with the cultural interior, while at the same time delivering a modern building typology for a high-quality tourism experience, which could be robust, vandal-proof, prefabricated, and unique. In response, a protective, purposeful, and economical shroud was proposed to conceal the privileged experience of the cultural interior. This spatial strategy preserves the agency of the Aboriginal community in the telling of their story. And the immediate landscape offered a language of materiality to this approach. And in the first esquisse of the project, we presented a shadow against the Banksia and a cultural interior revealed. In terms of siting, a communal pavilion is sleeved between stands of Banksia, and a large domed interior is framed on approach. A fire at the mouth of the dome is placed to anchor gathering and storytelling, and to the north, a series of individual sleeping huts are each sited in particular relationship with the scrub. The developed plan consolidated an enfilade of spaces and taut forms, The entire site is off-grid, toilets are dry composting, and rainwater is harvested and stored on site. The individual huts are entirely unserviced. The detailed plan shows the developed layout of the main facilities with a communal dome and stores, kitchen and internal dining, guides' quarters, and ablutions. The project is almost entirely constructed of durable hardwoods. Exteriors are of charred silvertop ash and interiors are of blackwood and Tasmanian oak. And there is no glass at Kirkani-Lumi. The individual hut floors are entirely mattressed and opened by a series of timber awnings. The awnings extend the usable space of the huts without increasing the impact of the foundation. During construction, prefabricated building elements were airlifted into the site, and this allowed pinpoint accuracy in the placement of structures and preserved the delicate understory vegetation. Not a single tree was removed or cut down in the project. External and internal linings were installed on site, and members of the Aboriginal community were engaged for the charring process. And so to the experience of the completed work. The approach to the site is made from the pristine coast through the low coastal heath, where guests are collected by an elevated boardwalk which winds its way through the vegetation. On first glimpse, the communal building appears as a shadow emerging from the scrub. And as guests arrive onto the communal deck, the interior is revealed. Sliding wall panels and shutters are adjusted depending on conditions of light and prevailing weather, and open to reveal bronze mesh screens which filter golden light to the interior. The materiality of the internal linings is carefully considered in the context of the traditional structures and cultural attire. A vault extends from the communal dome through to the kitchen, where subtle references to cultural forms are echoed in the joinery detailing. In the galley kitchen and communal dining, walls open to the landscape and through to the ablutions which lead to the hut boardwalks. Showers are fully lined in stainless steel. And from the end of the communal pavilion, the access towards the huts. The awning openings preserve the privacy of the interiors. In further considering the traditions of life on the islands in the Furneaux archipelago, the detailing references this maritime heritage through nautical rigging and sailing grab rails used as door pulls. In the residual spaces between the domed interior and the charred exterior cladding, nests are provided for hollow-dependent marsupials and birds, including the endangered New Holland mouse, which frequents the site. Bedding is supplemented with wallaby pelt throws, known traditionally as riori. And guests wake to soft light and the activity of honeyeaters feeding just beyond the reach of their beds. In recognising the importance of this project, Poppy and I always sought to achieve an architectural sensibility that allowed the spaces of Kirkani-Lumi to make the fullest experiential offering to the Aboriginal community in the telling of their story. Architecture is an atavistic urge, as Marcel Breuer put it, of a constant return to origins. And so too, it is an act of constant remembering. This sense resolves most strongly, we feel, when the attention of architecture is focused towards the essential nature of human experience. This is the quality we are searching for in our work. It must serve to occasion human being. Andrew, I realise that that's probably shorter than you expected, but that is the extent of my contribution. So I welcome the next speaker, if that's